of discovery and interpretation.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's a testament to how powerful these ancient texts are, that even today they still spark debate, inspire new scholarship.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of power, let's talk about what makes the King James Bible so unique, so captivating from a literary perspective.
Yes, let's dive into that language because it's always fascinated me. There's a majesty to it, a poetic quality. It's almost otherworldly.
You're right on the money. The King James Bible, it's known for its majesty of style. And that's no accident. Remember those instructions.
Yeah.
Avoid contemporary idioms. Keep that formal tone.
Right. It was supposed to sound timeless, like it came straight from, well, you know.
Exactly. And they pulled it off big time. The King James Bible, it introduced phrases, words that are now part of everyday English.
It's like they created a new language, a biblical language, one that would influence generations to come.
That's it, exactly. Think about phrases like feet of clay or a fly in the ointment. Those are classic sayings, and they come straight from the King James Bible. It also introduced words like long-suffering, loving kindness into common usage.
It's amazing how one book could shape how we speak, how we write. But it's not just individual words or phrases, is it? It's the whole style, the cadence, the rhythm. It's so unique.
Oh, absolutely. The King James Bible, that poetic language, the vivid imagery, the timeless themes, it's all seeped into English literature. Writers, they've been drawing from it for centuries.
Can you give us some examples? How did this biblical language actually influence other writers?
Well, think about Shakespeare. A lot of his plays, they're full of biblical allusions, echoes of the King James Version. Even his sentence structures, his rhythms, they often sound like the biblical text. And then there's John Milton, Paradise Lost. That's a masterpiece that owes so much to the language, the imagery of the King James Bible. You can trace this influence through the centuries, really, from the Romantic poets to Victorian novelists, even modern-day writers.
It's like the King James Bible. It planted a seed, and that seed blossomed into this whole vibrant literary landscape.
And its influence, it goes way beyond just literature. You see it in music, in art, political speeches, even everyday conversations. It's become part of our cultural vocabulary, a way to understand the world, to express ourselves.
So it's not just a book, it's a cultural phenomenon. And that brings us to a fascinating question. How did this book, with all its complexities, its contradictions, how did it become so influential? Why has it resonated with people across centuries, across cultures?
That's a question we're going to tackle in our next segment. Because the story of the King James Bible, it's not just about how it was made or about its language. It's about its impact, its legacy, the reasons why it continues to fascinate us even today.
Okay, so we've talked about where the King James Bible came from, the politics behind it, the whole translation process, that incredible language. But how did it all come together to have such a lasting impact?
Try to imagine a world without phrases like a wolf in sheep's clothing or the salt of the earth.
I can't really. They're so ingrained in our language, like they've always been there.
And that's exactly it, right? The King James Bible, it didn't just give us new words and phrases. It gave us a whole framework for thinking, for expressing emotions, for dealing with the big questions in life. And it did it in a way that really resonated with people, no matter their background.
It's like it gave a voice to something universal, something bigger than any one religion.
Exactly. And that universality, that's a big reason for its lasting impact. But we can't forget the King James Bible also had a very specific agenda. It was meant to unify England under a single religious authority.
Right. It was King James's way of controlling things, politically and religiously.
And, in that sense, it was a huge success. The King James Bible was the main text for English-speaking Christians for centuries. It shaped how people practiced their religion. It inspired tons of sermons. It provided common ground for shared beliefs.
It's like it built a foundation, a cultural bedrock. And so much else was built on top of that.
And that bedrock, it went way beyond religion. We've talked about its influence on literature, but it's also there in music, art, law, even politics. Even now, you see phrases and imagery from the King James Bible popping up in unexpected places, shaping how we see the world.
It's really incredible how something made for one specific purpose could have such a wide, lasting impact.
It shows the power of language, the power of stories, the power of a text that captures something essential about being human. But we also have to remember, the King James Bible has had its share of controversy and debate.
Right, like the unicorn mistranslation and the whole debate about the Apocrypha. But what are some other criticisms people have had?
One big one is, despite how beautiful the language is, it's also really old-fashioned. It can be hard for modern readers to understand.
Yeah, I get that. Sometimes it feels like you need a dictionary just to get through a single verse.
And that leads to another criticism. All that archaic language, it can actually create a barrier between the reader and what the text is trying to say.
So instead of making things clearer, the language can actually make it harder to understand.
For some readers, definitely. And then there's the issue of translation choices. Like we talked about, translation involves interpretation. And those King James translators, they made choices that reflected their own beliefs and cultural biases.
So it's not a completely neutral or objective translation.
No translation really is. And over time, scholars have found places where the King James Version maybe doesn't accurately reflect the original Hebrew or Greek.
So even with all its influence, all its cultural importance, the King James Bible is still a product of its time, with all the limitations that come with that.
Absolutely. And it's important to look at it with a critical eye, to question its assumptions, to consider other viewpoints.
Mhm.
But even with its flaws and controversies, the King James Bible is still a landmark achievement.
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? It's both deeply flawed and undeniably influential.
And that paradox, that's part of what makes it so fascinating. It makes us think about the connection between language, culture, and belief.
Mhm.
It makes us wrestle with the complexities of history and interpretation.
So where do we go from here? What can we take away from all this, from our deep dive into the King James Bible?
Here's something to think about. The influence of the King James Bible. It shows us how powerful translation can be. It shows how a text, even one from centuries ago, can still speak to us, inspire us, challenge us. And it makes you wonder, what other historical texts could use a fresh look, a deep dive into their translations and how we interpret them?
That's a great point to end on. We've just scratched the surface today. But hopefully this has sparked your curiosity, made you want to keep exploring, because there's always more to uncover in the world of the King James Bible. It's fascinating.
And beyond, right? Because the questions we've been talking about today, they apply to so many other texts, so many other areas of history and culture. Keep asking those questions. Keep digging deeper. You never know what you might find.
Thanks for joining us today on this journey. Until next time, keep diving deep.